A very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone tuned in with us, whatever time zone you're located and wherever you are located. So this is another day when I will go on a soliloquy, so to speak. We have no guests for this afternoon. Perhaps we just rest a while as far as discussions are concerned, because precisely there's a lot of, a lot of things happening in the political landscape. But there are certain things that we have to mention and discuss precisely because up to this day, after 35 years or so, there is still a confusion regarding this. And that is why the title of our program this afternoon is Perplexities. Perplexities, coming from the original root word in Latin, which is perplexus. And this means to disturb intentionally as to make impossible clear thinking. So the word that we have for our program this afternoon, perplexities, comes from that word in Latin, perplexus, which means, and let me repeat this so that we know exactly what we're talking about, to disturb intentionally as to make impossible clear thinking. Okay, I will refer here to two issues that keep on coming back. Several years ago, I have already talked about this in several episodes of your Rita Gadi Hour. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have tried to get into several of our programs. They upload this, they share this, and some of them even give emphasis to many of the things that we have been saying. But despite the fact that we have talked about it quite lengthily, perhaps not really in detail, although every time I talk about this, I always cite my sources, which are actually official documents which will substantiate the things I'm saying. So two issues, and we keep going back and forth in the past and then towards the future, but we have to talk about it today, the present. So these are first, the wealth of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, and second, the human rights cases that they blame on Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, a man who has been our president for 21 years until 1986, who has been no longer in the political landscape for the past 35 years or so. But every time there is some political discussion, they come out again, they, meaning those that oppose Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, come up again with these two particular issues. And that is his wealth, which they say he stole from the Filipino people, and the human rights violations that transpired during his 21-year regime, and which also they say and they claim that he was part of these human rights violations, whether it was during martial law or thereafter. So I go back to this precisely because today we are going into the perplexities of those who keep on bringing out this issue, especially now that you have the political landscape or the political circus coming up with a lot of accusations from one candidate to the other. But always these two issues surface. Now, whether or not you would be perplexed enough to believe that these two issues are inherited by blood or by genealogy is something which will really perplex you for the rest of your life. So whoever else is coming up with these issues, precisely, I go back to the origin of what it means to be perplexed, and that is to deliberately and intentionally disturb your mental thinking so that you are in a state of impossibility for clear thinking because it keeps on being repeated. Well, as they say, if you keep on repeating a lie, it becomes a truth. No, the truth always is the truth. And as they say, if it is the truth, as often as you try to chip it, the brighter it will shine. It's like a diamond, as they say. Anyway, so let's go now for this particular issue. Before I go into that, maybe I could also segue to some of the questions that were raised in the past episodes of our Rita Gadi Hour. For instance, one of the last questions last week, or was it the other week, was a question about the cronies of President Marcos. Cronies, those are people that they suspect would have benefited from their relationship with Marcos, and that's why they're called cronies. You must understand that the members of the cabinet of President Marcos were, as we could call it, it's a term that they use quite often, technocrats. They are not politicians, except perhaps eventually they became politicians. But when they were appointed in the cabinet, and these are the executive offices under the office of the president, they were not involved in politics. They were chosen according to the expertise that they have, according to the department that they will be heading. Like, for instance, you would have somebody in the public works. He could be a structural, civil engineer, and all the other disciplines under the engineering expertise or the engineering discipline. If you needed somebody in energy, then it had to be somebody also who had something to do with energy, etc., and all of this. And it follows that all of those appointed in those cabinet positions have their own expertise in their respective departments. As a matter of fact, one of the last of them was even a summa cum laude in his engineering studies, or several others who have received masteral degrees in the offices in their scholastic background for them to occupy those executive offices. So you cannot categorize them as cronies. Some of them were wealthy in their own right before they joined government, and they did not use their offices for any of the businesses or any of the establishments that they belonged to in the past. That is on record, because up to this day, we have not heard anybody rise up and say that Cesar Virata, for instance, who was Department of Finance Minister at the time, and who became Prime Minister likewise during the time of President Marcos, was involved in some business, or that he made money for certain establishments that were connected with him during the time. And so the same thing goes with Jaime Laya, who was the governor of Central Bank, several others. My memory sometimes have lapses as far as names and departments are concerned, but it is a fact, because you could do your research on this. You have the records already there in the archives regarding all of this personality. So then let us declassify them as being cronies, because they were, as we've said, the experts in their respective fields, and they were not doing any business with government, nor were they involved in any other activity other than the executive functions of their respective offices. Then you have the close friends of President Marcos that are now being called as cronies. But then you must understand that these were already men who were handling their particular businesses on their own without any connections with government prior to the presidency of President Marcos. And they did not avail of any other favors that we know of regarding their particular businesses, for instance, like San Miguel Corporation or San Miguel Brewery or San Miguel Foods, etc., was already functioning at the time, and you did not need connections with government for that business to be able to to progress. There was they keep on associating, for instance, the coconut levy, but that was for the farmers. That was being extracted as far as their production was concerned, and the money would have been also for the benefit of the farmers, which should have established the factories that would be functioning for the derivatives of coconut, because then it was discovered by President Marcos himself after consultation with a number of Europeans who knew all the different derivatives that you could obtain from coconut. Because I've said earlier that we had one of the most thriving industries in the world as far as coconut production is concerned. So the coconut levy was for the benefit of the farmers, but not directly to be given to them in a manner of distributing likewise. It's like back and forth thing. But that was for the establishment of the kind of factories and the kind of engineering facilities that could assist them in producing more, in doing the production and facilitating their production. And as I've said, with establishing the factories that could be able to come out with all the derivatives of coconut. So now you have virgin coconut oil, which is a prime commodity, and you even have the extra virgin coconut oil. Then you have other derivatives from this. As a matter of fact, Procter and Gamble, that was already using our coconut, was using this for soap. But this could also be used for many others, like several other beauty products and so forth, and medicinal likewise, even the water and everything else that you could, the coconut tree, the coconut fruit, and the coconut husk, all of this could produce something that could be of benefit. And that was where the coconut levy should have gone. But it did not materialize because, well, 1986 ended all of those plans. But President Marcos has already consulted with a lot of Europeans. As a matter of fact, I covered one of those meetings with some German scientists who came and presented what are the different derivatives that could be obtained from coconut, not just the tree or the trunk or the fruit, but everything else that they call it, as a matter of fact, the tree of life. So that is the coconut levy. So let us not associate this as being connected with any crony, because the coconut levy was not pursued as far as where that levy is going to go. Now they're talking about giving it back to the farmers. Farmers at the time may have been how old? 20, 27, 30, 40 at the oldest. That's 35 years since or so. So the farmers now would be about 70 plus. So it is a matter of trying to establish if you're still going to return whatever was levied during that time. And second, who are qualified to obtain this. And third, what was the original plan of the coconut levy? So again, we are declassifying if anybody of the friends of President Marcos obtained favors and could be called cronies. Several others too. I will not mention the names because many of them are really prominent businessmen who have progressed over the years, some in the field of laboratories and production of medicines, etc., others with plantations and so forth. And you would see that over the years, they were not connected directly with the government, or they did not have any other, any other connection with President Marcos, other than perhaps themselves obtaining loans from government institutions, like from the Development Bank of the Philippines if they were involved in farming. And then you had the Land Bank if they were also involved in some activities which involved agriculture and so forth. But all of this had a process. So it is not merely just doling out money to them because they're friends, but they had to go through the process of obtaining loans, of getting investments from overseas if that was needed and that was necessary, and that was done. And all of this over the years that you have seen, and this is on record, they have paid back those loans. They have not just paid back, but they have progressed even with all those investments that were taken in. So if that could answer, perhaps not completely, but at least as best as I could remember and I could recall, as far as these connections of this businessmen with President Marcos are concerned, that was it. None of them obtained direct assistance, for instance, that they would go to Malacanang and so forth. And, well, maybe as I've said, I may not be privy to this, but you could see from the progression of these businesses and these gentlemen or ladies, if they were also in business, have actually been legally and justifiable, not only in their income tax returns, but also in how they have progressed individually and collectively for that matter. So if the question, the person who asked that question, if I could touch on it, that's as far as I can go. I don't have the documents except, for instance, in early on, during the time of the PCGG's first years, when you had Jovita Salonga as the chairman of the PCGG, you can check this now with the records of the Presidential Commission on Good Government in the years 1986, 87, and perhaps until 1988, in the first 3 years of Jovita Salonga, where they had what they call as the compromise agreements. These are between the friends of President Marcos, who made a compromise agreement with the government of Mrs. Aquino for them to be able to surrender what they felt belonged to President Marcos or they held in trust. And also those that they kept for themselves, saying that this is really our own business. I will not go into the details of what they held as their own and what they surrendered as belonging to President Marcos, but whatever it is that they turned over to the government, then you could also check all of this with the records of the PCGG. But together with that compromise agreement, they paid a certain amount for that compromise that they did with the government of Mrs. Aquino. And there perhaps you could also analyze exactly if what they paid the Philippine government, which is the Filipino people, is commensurate to the businesses that they held and to the businesses that they controlled and to the businesses they claim belong to them exclusively. So again, as I've said, you have this on record, and that is as far as I can go because I have read them, I have seen them, I know who they are, and short of naming them and telling how much they paid, it is up to you now to do your own research. But I'm telling you, the records are there with the PCGG, and there you could read the names of those who entered into compromise agreements with a certain fee paid to the government of Mrs. Aquino through the PCGG that was at the time headed by Jovita Salonga. Okay, so now I go back to these perplexities that we're talking about. Two of these issues that keep on recurring. There is one person, for instance, who said that President Marcos stole $10 billion from the Filipino people. Up to this day, they keep on repeating that. The amount actually changes depending on who makes the statement. Sometime back, it was only about $700 million, and then it grew to about $7 billion. And then now it is $10 billion, according to one candidate, and then saying that we cannot go back to having anybody steal again $10 billion from the Filipino people. We will talk about the human rights cases after this. But the $10 billion, let's look at it, the way the records are speaking to us, because as I've said, history speaks. And so what do we have? We have, for instance, the budget of Marcos at the time was 488 billion pesos. 488 billion pesos. The exchange rate of the peso to the dollar is $1 to 7 pesos. So you try multiplying the 488 billion peso budget of Marcos for 21 years, and how much is that in American dollars? And then you could see that if Marcos stole $10 billion from the National Treasury, then how much would have been left? Something like $6.7 billion. So you mean to tell me that in 21 years, he was only spending so much for the government? So what happens to the personnel that were employed by the government? That would not be sufficient for their salaries. How about the buildings that they're occupied? How about the electricity, the water, and all the facilities that are needed to make government run? Hindi magkakasya. And then in addition to that, there was also the infrastructure that was done during the 21 years. You have the thousands, I don't have the exact number, but 1,000 kilometers of roads and bridges. You have the seaports and the airports. You had the dams. Well, I was trying to locate my sources. Then we have here all these dams from 1967 up to 1985. 1967, you had Angat. You had 1977, you have Pantabangan. Also in the same year, you had the later geothermal. 79, you had the Makiling Banahaw, also the geothermal. 79, you had the Agus 2 Hydra. In 80, you had the Tiwi geothermal. 1980, you also had the Masigway hydroelectric. And then in 81, you had the Cebu thermal. And then in 1982, the Kalayaan hydro. And then in 1982, the Agno 7 hydro. 1983, the Bataan, the nuclear plant was constructed in 82. In 83, you had the that was it, the Bataan nuclear power plant. In 83, also you have the Magat the Magat Hydro, 1983, you had the, I can hardly read my own handwriting. This is from my diary, as a matter of fact. 1983, the Palimpunoo geothermal in Negros. In 1984, you had the Calaca coal power plant. 1984, you had the Magat A hydro. Again in 1984, you had the Magat B hydro. In 1985, you have the Agus 4 hydro. And then 85, you have the Agus 5 hydro. In 1985, you had the Palang hydroelectric plant. So these are the dams and the hydroelectric facilities that were built during the time from 1967 to 1985. So, saan kumuha ng pera? Okay, there were foreign investments, fine. So the total debt that Marcos had during the 21 years that would facilitate not just the national budget, but also all of these dams that I was saying, and that includes also the other infrastructure of the seaports and airports, the bridges, the buildings, the schoolhouses for every barangay, 2 classrooms for every barangay, 44,800 barangays at the time. But the external debt of Marcos, our foreign debt at the time, was $28 billion in the 21 years. So together with that, plus the budget that he had of 488 billion pesos, which is about equivalent to only 67 billion dollars, if you convert it to dollars or something to that effect. Don't question my arithmetic, but compute it yourself, because I'm rambling through this. And as I've said, I'm reading through my diary. But 28 billion, I wrote that down. That is the external debt. O yan ang utang natin at the time, 21 years. But also you had, I forgot to mention, all the international airport. Then you also had the tertiary hospitals. They were also built during the time, and several other infrastructure that was then. So if you could try to compute it, where did the $10 billion come from that he should have stolen? See, these are the perplexities that I'm talking about. And what does it mean? It is disturbing intentionally so that we make it impossible for us to think clearly. Kasi sinasabi nagnakaw. Okay. The budget is where the money of the Filipino people is located. That is our taxes. Whatever else, we do not donate to the government. We pay taxes. That is for the maintenance of our government, for the salaries and for the programs and projects. Okay. Then we also the government also make loans. I already mentioned that in the 21 years of President Marcos, he had 28 billion total from 1968 to 1986. So yon ang total, 28 billion plus all the structures I've already mentioned. And then you also have pala yung mga structures ni Mrs. Marcos, so you also had the PICC, etc., and all that entire complex with all of these structures there. Now, if the money of the Filipino people, our money, is in the national budget, in the national treasury, together with all the loans that the government has obtained, it's all there. Okay. Now, the question is, where did Marcos steal the money of the Filipino people? Where do we see this? We don't have any evidence of this. So why are people telling us repeatedly that he stole the money of the Filipino people? Well, the only time really that this was sorted out meticulously and solicitously was when they filed a criminal case against Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos in New York, in the United States of America. First in Los Angeles, and then eventually in New York. It was in the trial of New York City, in Foley Square, the District Court of Judge John F. Keenan. That is where, as I've always claimed, I personally, professionally, and in many other ways got involved in the many aspects of that particular case. I was there every day of the trial. I have in my possession right now all the 6,500 plus pages transcript, the transcript of the entire proceeding of 3.5 months in that particular courthouse. I was with the Office of the counsel of Mrs. Marcos that defended her and Ferdinand Marcos, and that is the office of Mr. Jerry Spence, one of the finest criminal lawyers of the United States of America. And I was privy also to the fact that a whole room of 350,000 pages of documents were supposed to have been presented as they cherry-picked what they wanted to cherry-pick in the courthouse of John F. Keenan. Of those 350,000 documents, and together with the 95 human beings, 95 persons that were brought to the witness stand against Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. So I was privy to this every day of the trial. So what does this mean? This means that I was as curious as all of you right now, as you're asking this, saan nagnakaw ng pera si Marcos? So we wanted to find out, together with the rest of the Filipino people, I'm sure if you just followed the trial, where did Marcos steal the money of the Filipino people? And the fact that they had cognizance, the United States government had cognizance of the case because allegedly the money that he stole from the Filipino people bought for prime real estate properties in the city of New York. Yun ang mahalaga doon. But the law that they were supposed to have violated or allegedly violated was, I think I've spelled this out quite often, the RICO case, Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organization Law, meaning that the government of President and Mrs. Marcos, or the government of the Philippines at the time during the regime of President Marcos, was a criminal syndicate. Now, we ask the question, if indeed, as they claim and they allege it was a criminal syndicate, that means that the money they used was fraudulent, a money that was stolen, the way the sleazy underworld, Balzacian environment of all of this mafiosi, godfathers, etc. We've seen this in the movies, the way that kind of life was. That was how they tried to picture Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Now, we go to the courthouse. I have repeated this so many times. I have cited so many instances, but now I finally will come to you with the records of the case. A lot of people have said that I present this with the records. Now I will read to you, not just the records of the case. I will read to you the statement of the judge himself. The judge in the trial court of New York, that Southern District Trial Court, under John F. Keenan. That was the judge at the time. Now, before I get into what he said, let me repeat again the background of this RICO case. If the Marcoses committed a crime, it was the people of the Republic of the Philippines that had the right to file the suit against them. And only when found guilty by the Philippine courts for having stolen money from the Filipino people, and that stolen money landed in some accounts in the United States from which the purchases of American real estate properties were made, then, and only then, could the United States government prosecute. The American government had 2 counts on this. It was alleged that a certain amount of money in 2 racketeering acts that related to this issue was laundered, and the presumption that the money was stolen. There were monies that were brought into American banks, and these banks and the monies in these banks were used to purchase the buildings. And those are the proofs presented in evidence. What the United States government had to prove, with the Philippine government closely assisting the United States government, was that Ferdinand Marcos stole those monies from the Filipino people, and those monies were used to buy American properties. So the question there is very clear. It is not perplexing. It is very clear. Either the money was stolen or not. So do not be perplexed, because that's the issue. Either the money was stolen or not. Now, the case did not need proof how the money was spent. So that was not necessary to prove how the money was spent in order to accomplish the evidence of guilt. Let me now read to you the exact words of Judge John F. Keenan. I've never read this before. I keep on citing court records. I keep on reading court records. I keep on reading the judgment after this trial. But now I am going to read to you here, just in case you could see where I'm coming from. These are the court records, etc. And nakikita ba ito sa ano? Anyway, so ayan, ayan. And this is what Judge John F. Keenan said. Quote, "What has been brought into this courtroom is, in truth and in fact, an unprecedented prosecution. I don't think in the annals of American jurisprudence has ever been a prosecution quite like this. And I am well aware of that. And the policy decision by the executive department are different from the view of the judicial branch." So you must understand this, that the executive department is the Department of Justice of America. So sinasabi dito ng judge, iba yung sinasabi ng executive department at iba yung view ng judicial branch. I continue the quote from John F. Keenan. "I am not a member of the executive. I am a member of the judicial branch. And my role and my function has nothing to do with the policy of the philosophy of what is unfolding in front of me. I mean, you are all big boys and girls, and you bring this unprecedented prosecution not only against the former president of an ally of the United States, but then he dies, and you pursue the case against his widow. And then you come and say, well, gee, I can't get the documents." Close quote. So the documents, this is me already talking, the documents according to the United States prosecutor, Charles Labella, the documents were the documents from the Swiss banks. The ownership of those accounts was not determined. The nature of those accounts was not determined either. And most importantly, the source of those accounts were also not determined. Let me repeat that. Sa lahat ng kanilang nakuhang 350,000 documents from Malacanang, from Hicam Air Base, from the Marcoses, from all the banks, from the governments of Switzerland, from the banks of the United States of America, from the banks here in the Philippines, if they did obtain some bank records here, from all of those 350,000 documents, they were asking for, what the judge was looking for was, where is the document, or where are the documents that could prove that those monies in the Swiss accounts were stolen from the Filipino people and that it landed in the American banks and then bought for real estate properties in New York City. That was what the judge was trying to establish from the prosecutor, from Charles Tabella and that lady Debra Livingstone and the other assistant that he had, McInerney. So they answer him, gee, we can't find the documents. They could not find the documents that would prove that money was stolen from the Filipino people. Now, let me continue. Where was the stolen money? John Keenan, the judge in that case, he admonished the prosecution, the American prosecutor, and this is what he said, and I am now quoting directly from court records. Quote, "I keep coming back to the question I ask myself, which I have asked a few times back. This case really involves ripping it down to its fundamentals. The case involves, if the government's case is to be believed, the theft of the late President of over $200 million of Philippine government money, which was invested in New York to buy 4 buildings. That's the case, right? With all the fancy ornaments on the tree. That's what the case is all about, isn't it? What I want to find out is what the frauds were here in America. Because Mrs. Aquino can enforce her own laws, but I don't want to be enforcing her laws here. What are the frauds here in the United States, in New York, financial institutions? What is an American court? What am I doing here at 40 Foley Square, trying a case involving the alleged theft from the Philippine banks? Close quote. Okay. These are the records from the Southern District of New York. These are the court records which are available for the public. I am citing the pages here, 5337, 5353, 5356. So that is what I have quoted from those pages from the court records. So, you know, the reason perhaps why the United States prosecution never really read aloud to the jury the indictment. Because if you read the indictment itself, it was bizarre, perplexing. They would have lost, I mean, if they read it to the jury, they would have lost the jury from the very start of the trial because of the absurdity of the language by which it was framed. I mean, the absurdity of the language and by which the charges themselves were framed. Racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization law. It was already complex to begin with. It was intended, considering the background and the reasons for which that particular law was written and established and passed as a law in 1972, because the law speaks of an enterprise, a criminal syndicate, a sinister secret organization of vice lords, of the underworld gangs and godfathers, of an association that would weave through every conceivable corruption in the streets, in high places where influence, bribery, sleazy deals were conceived. That was the setting for the RICO Act. And the United States of America, together with your own government, the Philippine government, did everything to picture the Marcos administration in that light. That was the law that Marcos should have been violated, allegedly violated. And that was the indictment in New York City. You know, the Notre Dame professor who wrote that RICO law, Professor G. Robert Blakely, he was trying to defend his law and saying that this was really referring only to that underground world, etc. But now what is happening is it's being used for political reasons. So that is how it goes. Now, again, if we go back to the numbers, 488 billion pesos of the budget of Marcos and all the infrastructure that he constructed and everything else that went into the running of the government, where is the $10 billion that he should have stolen? It would mean that government stopped working at least half his term to be able to say that he stole the money of the Filipino people during his term. Early on, I already mentioned that from 1946 to 1948, on record, likewise, these are part of the documents, as a matter of fact, that are included in those 350,000 documents that were used for the trial. But as I've said, they cherry pick. Pinili lang nila yung mga dokumentong gagamitin nila. Pero itong mga dokumentong ito, hindi nila nilabas. And that is what I read several episodes ago, where I mentioned that a certain Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, lawyer, has in his possession several thousand metric tons of precious metals. And that is from 1946 to 1948. I did not mention anymore the number of tonnage of these precious metals in all the placements and all the records that acknowledge that counsel or lawyer Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, a lawyer at the time, has in his possession so and so amount of precious metals. That was long before, that was immediately after the war, long after he entered politics, long before he became a congressman, and long before he even became president of the Republic of the Philippines. Other than that, I've already mentioned also incidents where some people have actually seen gold bars from the floor to the ceiling. One of them is still alive. He wrote about this. As a matter of fact, you have the son of Senator Roy, one of the political leaders at the time, who said that he was brought by his father in some location and he actually saw gold bars from floor to ceiling. He did not mention the place, but he wrote about this and it was published in one of our newspapers saying that he actually saw it. Then you had also Enrique Sobel, who had the documents regarding the placements or regarding the authenticity of these gold bars and where they're located and how he was going to be requested by President Marcos to take charge of this, a certain percentage to be left only for his family and for the rest for the Filipino people. But it was never pursued because as he was trying to do the negotiations, it was during the administration of Mrs. Aquino. I think if you will go over the records on this, then you could see that there were interviews conducted by the known journalist Louis Beltran and several other statements made by Mr. Enrique Sobel likewise, attesting to what I'm talking about. Several other incidents, like also the own story of Mrs. Marcos when she said that when she was trying to renovate the Marcos ancestral home in Ilocos, she tore down what looked like a divider and felt that perhaps if she opened it widely, it would be better for a politician to have greater space to entertain his guests, not knowing that that kind of divider that she broke down was actually gold bars. So it was a story that she relayed. But if you do not want to believe her story, there are other people who also talked about this in several instances. And then, of course, you also have the testimonies of many of those working in Malacanang close to the president who were saying that some of his gold bars are being minted in Australia, and that one of the reasons why, that the minting plant of the central bank there in East Avenue was also utilized for the minting of some of this gold of Marcos, so that he did not have to bring them all the way to Australia to have this assayed and have this reminted and brought to the standard of gold, which is 99.99% or something, and so forth. So these are not just stories, but these are records, as a matter of fact. The central bank may have records such as this, that gold was being reminted and assayed, which did not belong to the Central Bank of the Philippines. As a matter of fact, after Marcos had left government, then there were a lot of rumors saying that he got the money from the central bank. No, he did not, because that was also testified by the central bank governor, Gabriel Singson, and several other officials of the Central Bank of the Philippines, saying that not one gold bar was removed from the central bank by Marcos or anybody associated with him. So all the gold that the Philippine government owned is there in the central bank. So all of this were just rumors. So every time people come up with an issue on gold bars, etc., that is again trying to perplex us. And what does perplexus mean? This is to disturb us intentionally so that it is impossible for people to think clearly. So they just try to come out with all kinds of allegations. And recently this has been coming up again and again. That is why I'm saying that I've talked about it quite lengthily and I've cited court records. But now, for the first time, I am not only citing court records. Yes, these are court records. I am reading the very statements made by the judge himself who presided over the trial in New York City, where they should have been able to prove indeed that there was money stolen from the Filipino people. And what did they say? Those are the words of John F. Keenan, the presiding judge. What did the prosecution, what did the Department of Justice of America tell him? Gee, we can't find the documents. Bakit hindi mahanap yung dokumento hanggang sa ngayon? I've made this challenge so many times. Present just one piece of paper, one witness that can testify that indeed that piece of paper contains the evidence that money was stolen from the Filipino people, the money of the Filipino people in the national treasury. To this day, wala yan. 900 cases were filed against Mrs. Marcos when she arrived. I think only 5 cases are remaining. What has happened to all the rest? They were all dismissed. Look at your court records again. The court records here in our Philippine courts, dismissed for what? For lack of evidence, for lack of merit. Bakit ang dami-dami? Kasi hinimay ulit nila eh. Lahat ng pinresenta sa New York, hinimay na naman nila dito. Is it double jeopardy? I don't know how you will stretch a judgment in a foreign court and stretch it all the way to a Philippine court. Sabi nila hindi daw double jeopardy yun kasi iba naman ang Philippine court. We cannot execute the judgment of New York. You don't have to execute that. That was a unanimous decision. Not guilty. Not guilty meaning wala silang makitang evidence. Unanimous. 12 members of the jury who knew nothing about Mrs. Marcos except her shoes. And what the newspapers kept on talking about her ostentatious lifestyle and so forth. Again, speaking of that, when she moved about traveling in New York City, for instance, or in other places, and she bought flowers and she bought jewelry and she bought things that they consider as her personal choices. Again, look for one document or one receipt that would claim that the money she used came from the national treasury. Then perhaps you could say she stole the money from the Filipino people to buy her lavish lifestyle. So stop saying they were wealthy from the very beginning before their lives together as husband and wife. Marcos is already a very rich man. Yan ang malungkot. Kung mayaman, nagnakaw. Ganun ba yun? Ganun na nangyari. Why? Because, again, let me go again to the records that I obtained from all of this perplexity that we are involved in. And what is this record? Eto na. This came from the Vice President of Mrs. Aquino herself. According to the late Vice President Salvador Doy Laurel, he gave us this document showing, makapalito kasi andun din yung mga, these documents contain the payments, the hiring papers and the payments made to 16 public relation firms. And I will read the public relations firms. So you could do your own checking on this. 16 public relations firms that are paid for by Mrs. Aquino's government. And their intent was, since they could not be able to come up with anything that Mrs. Aquino has done in her past for her to govern correctly the Philippine government and the Filipino people, and they could not say anything very much about what she's capable of doing. In fact, it was a TWA, sinasabi nga, talagang walang alam, and I'm quoting this is not coming from me. So here are the 16 foreign firms from America that Mrs. Aquino's government hired, or she hired. International Business Communication, TKO International Incorporated, Clearly Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton, SKC Associate, Kaplan Drysdale Chartered, Sawyer Miller Group, the Fountain Group, Robert Werner Group, Paul Hastings Kanofsky Walker, Reichler, Applebaum and Whitman, Galan Carago, Mores and Gramfinkel, Patton, I'm sorry for pronouncing it incorrectly, BOCGG and Blow, Ralph Harding, Warren and Associates, Crane and Bannerman and Associates, and this, remember this name, Mark Malloch Brown. Ayan na, yung may-ari ng Smartmatic, and connected with the Dominican also that did some Dominion, that also the Dominion also similar to our Smartmatic, that did their own hocus pocus with the elections of the presidency of the United States of America. So here you have it that in addition to this public relations firm, then you had the Western media, American media. They made sure that all the negative reports concentrated on Marcos and the money that he stole. And then, of course, eventually, they also came up with the human rights violation. So I've gone over this so many times, and perhaps I will have to repeat it one more time because of the perplexities that actually are beclouding so many of the issues of the day. We have to choose a candidate that has presented himself or herself to rule our government based on their own qualifications, if that is still necessary other than what is written in our Constitution. But if the candidate keeps on talking and bringing out, Marcos stole the money of the Filipino people, and I don't know how they connect this with the son, who's also a candidate for the presidency. So that is the perplexus that they're trying to do to the voting population. Remember, there's something like 61 million already, according to the latest data that is coming out from the Commission on Elections after the extension for the registration of voters. 61 million voters, and they're going to be confused or perplexed for as long as these issues are coming out and being brought about by even the candidates themselves. Why don't they just talk about themselves and how they intend to rule our people and how they intend to govern? Ang dami-dami kasi. I have a whole 5 pages of the many different aspects that they have to be concerned with once they start occupying the highest position in the land. But then again, as I've said, ayan na nga, ang dami-dami ng kanilang mga pinagsasabi tungkol dito. As we've said, because Marcos is so rich, the conclusion is he must have stolen. I've already talked about this, and now I have clarified it further, even from the mouth of the judge himself who presided over this case. And remember, Judge John F. Keenan and the counsel of Mrs. Marcos during the trial did not see eye to eye in many aspects. In fact, there was this exchange of whether the lawyer would be cited for contempt, and also the lawyer of Imelda also to cite the judge to inhibit himself from trying the case, because there was a prejudice already from the very start of the case. There was a prejudice by the judge himself against the counsel of Mrs. Marcos. But be that as it may, in spite of that exchanges in open court between the judge himself and the counsel of Mrs. Marcos, still the judge maintained, as he said, I will not allow the execution of Mrs. Aquino's law in my court. So that was very clear. I read that. Perhaps in the next episode, you will ask me to repeat the judge's words. And I gave you the pages of the court records. Again, I will repeat. I have complete records of the trial in New York, all 6,000 plus pages of the entire trial. Anyway, so as I've said, many of this income and assets, etc., of Marcos's of President Marcos remain unexplained. And why so? Because the government of the Republic of the Philippines during the time of Mrs. Aquino did not allow President Marcos to return here to the Philippines and face trial and face all of us and face all of you who keep on saying that he stole money from the people. Why did you not allow him to face you and to his face present your accusation so that he can answer? Since he died in 1989 and was not able to do this, now you keep on asking so many questions when you did not give him the chance to answer them. Who is going to answer? You expect his children to answer? They were not even born yet in 1948 and 1946. They were not even born yet when he was beginning to enter politics. The first child, the eldest, Aini, when was she born? She just turned 60 the other day. My goodness. And then you would expect her to know everything that her father did then. Then you have the candidate, Ferdinand Marcos II, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and you would expect him to also answer all the questions that he had, even the witnesses that they presented in New York, finance experts, bank managers, all of this bank managers and bank officials from Switzerland, and they were supposed to be handling the millions of the world. When they were asked the question, what did you think of President Marcos? He was a genius. That's exactly what they said. He was a financial genius because he was able to come up with so many programs and projects, and the way those foundations were named after nominees and they themselves would not know, the tracing of how the money got into those Swiss banks. My dears, we are dealing with a man that has been dead for so many years and was not allowed to answer all the questions that you have. Ask no more any questions, nor make such allegations and such statements. Many of you who make such statements are actually lawyers yourselves. Will you not trust the severest system of justice, which is the United States of America, that filed one of the severest kind of criminal case against Ferdinand Marcos, and then his wife thereafter, who also absolutely had no knowledge of what her husband was doing then before they got married, and how the Swiss banks got to be Swiss banks, and so forth. So we are just about to close our program. And as I've said, this is a program of perplexities. So do not be overruled by those who intend to disturb intentionally so as to be able to confuse us and to be able to make it appear that we cannot think correctly. All of us can think correctly. It is not a matter of arithmetic even. It is just plain and simple common sense. So what do we have here? I just want to go over as fast as I could with some of those who joined in. Good afternoon. This is from Reina Daniela Scolago. Wilfredo Opeñano, good afternoon likewise. Shamla Diaz, also good afternoon to you. Lucky Jasminas Dologin, lately I've been in vaccination. Makalusot, whatever this is, vaccination card. I'll handle that perhaps in the next episode. Thank you very much, Ma'am Rita, for information. Diday Aubrey Seguera. Then we have Reina Dantiels Calago. BBM is my president for the Philippines. Madam Rita, first time to watch you live, but I watch your YouTube channel. You are so detailed. What happened to our beloved Marcos? Thank you. Thank you very much for watching. She's watching from Sydney. Marina Book from Sydney, Australia. All these false accusations of hidden wealth and human rights, etc., all cases have been closed and proved are all verbal lies. Yes, these are the perplexities that they throw at us. Karen Tan Habok, good afternoon, and thank you for being a champion of the truth. Yes, the only way to argue with this is the truth. Exactly. No two sides of the law. There is only the side of the truth. Okay, and several others. This is from Karen Tan Habok. I am the granddaughter of Salvador Tan. Yes, he used to work with Sir Jaime Laya, yes, secretary during Marcos' time. Yes, indeed. These are fine gentlemen, and your father has served with some of the best, and that was during the time of President Marcos, the best and the brightest. Now, look at your candidates. They will hit the ground running. Ask them who their cabinet members would be, and then perhaps you could have an inkling as to how they're going to run our country, etc. So we close our program as always. Sometimes I forget this for lack of time, but we should not, especially during this season of Perplexus. Dear God, walk with us through this pandemic. Open our hearts to your guidance, O Lord, and give us the strength to share your love with others through this time of uncertainty. May we look at each day as a celebration of your greatness, and please make us ready to receive your merciful healing and to give your love to others the way you give your love to us. For thine is the power, the kingdom, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi, and this has been your hour.
Ba-ba-da-ba-dum, ba-ba-da-ba-dum, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.